Right, getting into some really interesting stuff today. Going to deep dive into this group, the Science of Identity Foundation.
SIF.
Yeah, SIF. And we're going to be focusing on what former members have to say.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, right? Because we always hear about these organizations from the outside, but getting these firsthand perspectives, like you were saying, can be really illuminating.
Absolutely. And we've got a bunch of different types of sources here.
Yeah.
Online discussions, articles. We've got some court documents.
Oh, wow.
Seems like SIF has created some really strong reactions from people over the years.
And when we're talking about SIF, we can't forget about the people at the center of it all.
Right.
So the founder, Chris Butler, and then some of his better-known students,
Like
Tulsi Gabbard, Alan Tibby, Joseph Bismarck, and those names always seem to come up when you're talking about SIF.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Yeah, let's unpack all of this.
We have quite a few accounts from former members who went to this SIF boarding school in the Philippines, and some pretty interesting details come out of those early experiences.
What really stood out to me was the way that Butler and his wife, Wailana, were presented to these students.
Oh, really?
Like, former students have talked about how they were taught to see this couple as messengers of God.
Messengers of God.
Yeah, I mean, almost like divine figures.
That's really interesting because it makes you wonder about the level of reverence there.
Yeah, it goes beyond just respecting a teacher or a leader, right?
For sure. I wonder how that kind of environment, like, shapes a young person's worldview.
You know, it makes me think about the potential for undue influence, especially in that environment. A boarding school, kids are separated from their family.
Totally immersed
Yeah.
in this one specific ideology.
Yeah, and then on that note, we also have to talk about Senator Gabbard's connection to SIF.
Right.
Some former members went to that school in the Philippines and also her Ponamaloa school in Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
And what they say about it.
Yeah, what do they say?
They really paint a picture of her involvement in the SIF community back in the 80s.
Back in the 80s, huh?
Yeah, I mean, and you combine those stories with the leaked SIF letters that refer to Gabbard.
Oh, right.
Back then, she was known as Krishna Katha Das,
Okay.
and they referred to her as Butler's Secretary for Personal Affairs.
Secretary for Personal Affairs.
And it really just suggests a really close and trusting relationship, maybe more than a typical teacher-student thing.
Makes you wonder what that role really involved.
Yeah, what does she do, and what does it tell us about her position within SIF? And this is where things get a bit more,
Complicated.
yeah, you could say that.
Because we have former members like Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson who have come out with some pretty heavy criticisms of Butler and SIF.
They have not held back at all.
No, they haven't.
They say that his teachings were controversial, maybe even harmful, and questioned a lot of the practices that were going on in SIF.
And it's not just like vague complaints, right?
No, they're not just griping.
They actually talk about being exposed to, this is pretty intense, like sexually graphic and homophobic lectures.
As children.
Yeah.
That's some serious stuff.
Pretty disturbing stuff.
Yeah, it's more than just disagreeing about what they believe in. They're saying that maybe there were some ethical lines crossed, maybe even harm done to these young, impressionable members.
Hard to ignore that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's also these accusations about like financial problems, irregularities with money, and possible exploitation within SIF. So Koviak and Ranson are really raising some red flags about how the money was being handled and if people were being taken advantage of.
Yeah, and these financial allegations are a big deal because it suggests that maybe the problems with SIF go beyond just the teachings, you know? It might be deeper than that.
Yeah, like baked into the structure of the organization itself.
Yeah, maybe.
Makes you think.
It does.
It's like, are we seeing a pattern here? Former members are expressing concerns about control, potential for abuse, and then financial issues. It's not a good look.
No, it's not. It's pretty troubling. And then this is where the Q&A connection comes in.
Oh, gosh, this is a whole other can of worms.
It really adds to the complexity of everything.
Right, QNet, this multi-level marketing company.
Yeah.
Apparently there are ties to SIF and some of the bigger names in the organization.
And it's not just like they know each other. We're talking arrests, investigations, accusations of fraud. QNet has gotten into some serious legal trouble in multiple countries.
So how entangled is SIF in all of this? Is it just like a few people within SIF doing something shady?
Or is there something deeper?
Right.
It's something we need to look into.
Especially when you think about this guy, Patrick Bowler, like a convicted drug trafficker.
Oh, wow.
Who was also involved with SIF.
That really blurs the lines between SIF and possibly some criminal activity.
It does, and it makes you wonder about those accusations of financial irregularities from Koviak and Ranson.
Yeah.
Maybe those are tied into this QNet thing. It feels like we're pulling on one thread, and it's unraveling a much larger tapestry of potential wrongdoing.
Absolutely. It's a lot to think about, and we have to remember that these are some really serious
Of
accusations,
course.
and we got to treat them with the gravity they deserve. But we also have to acknowledge that there are people out there who have had positive experiences with SIF.
Oh, right. Like Krishna Karunya's letter, where they praise Acharya Das, is his other name for his insightful lectures.
Yeah, and that letter, it brings up this interesting fact that Acharya Das, it seems like he draws his inspiration from all sorts of different sources.
Oh, what?
Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaja, even Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, which is another Vaishnava tradition.
Hold on. For those of us who don't know all the lingo, what's Vaishnava?
Oh, yeah, good point. So Vaishnavism is this big tradition within Hinduism. It focuses on worshiping Vishnu and his avatars like Krishna and Rama. There's a lot of diversity in it, different lineages and interpretations, but the big thing is devotion to Vishnu.
So Acharya Das is drawing from different branches of this Vaishnava tradition.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Interesting. It kind of makes you think that maybe there's some openness to different viewpoints within SIF.
And it gets even more interesting when you consider that Acharya Das is involved with the World Vaishnava Association.
What's that?
So it's this organization that brings together devotees from all sorts of different Vaishnava traditions, which, could suggest that there's a willingness to talk and collaborate.
So it's not like a totally one-sided picture.
Right.
We have these really serious concerns raised by former members, but then we also have evidence of diverse opinions, maybe even some positive experiences.
It might be that SIF is more complex and nuanced than it looks at first glance.
It definitely seems like there's a lot to unpack here.
There is.
All right, well, let's keep going. I want to see how these seemingly different pieces fit together. This is where it gets really interesting.
I agree. The deeper we dig, the more intricate the story becomes.
So we were just talking about all these different threads. The concerns about Butler's teachings, the financial questions, and the QNet thing. I'm super curious how this all fits together.
Well, the money seems to be the biggest connection. So we have these former members alleging all these financial irregularities within SIF, and then you have QNet, which has been accused of basically being a pyramid scheme.
Right.
And they're linked to SIF through some of its big names.
That's a good point, because pyramid schemes, by their nature, they rely on recruitment and often exploit people financially. So if that's connected to how SIF operated, that raises some major ethical flags.
Yeah, no kidding. And those concerns get even bigger when you think about what some former members have said. They've described feeling pressured to conform to Butler's expectations, and they might be ostracized if they question his authority.
Yeah, if you have a system where people are taught to see a leader as a divine figure, and then there's this potential for financial exploitation, that creates a really difficult situation for people to speak out or get help.
Exactly. They might be afraid of going against the teachings and then also facing social and financial repercussions. It's really hard to break free from that kind of power dynamic.
And it's not just speculation. We've got actual documented cases of legal action against QNet, including arrests and frozen bank accounts.
Serious stuff.
It seems like authorities are taking these accusations of fraud pretty seriously.
Yeah, and remember Patrick Bowler, the convicted drug trafficker who was also involved with SIF.
Right.
It just adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing. It makes you wonder how much potential criminal activity might be intertwined with SIF.
We keep coming back to the fact that multiple former members have raised similar concerns about control, potential abuse, and those financial irregularities. There might be a pattern here.
Yeah, I think we need to consider the possibility that the issues with SIF go beyond just Butler's teachings. Maybe the structure of the organization itself encourages this kind of behavior.
So we're seeing potential problems with both what was being taught and how the whole organization was run.
Yeah.
And this is all happening while this QNet controversy is swirling around, which makes you think about that line between religious practice and making money.
Where does one end and the other begin? Right.
Exactly.
And how much did Chris Butler actually know about all of this?
Good question. And then there's Tulsi Gabbard. We talked about her role as Butler's Secretary for Personal Affairs.
Right.
But she was also listed as an agent for several businesses connected to SIF. Healthy's Inc., Sunset Studios, and Three Kicks Productions.
Her deep involvement with all those businesses brings up some serious questions, especially considering her political career. Did any of that influence her political decisions?
Yeah, and how much did her constituents know about this stuff? It seems like transparency would be super important, especially with all the potential controversies surrounding SIF and QNet.
It's a good reminder that what's going on in someone's personal life and their political life, it's all connected.
For sure.
And someone's beliefs and what they're involved in can have a big impact, you know?
It's crazy how this started as a deep dive into what former members had to say,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about potential abuse, financial stuff, and even political implications. It's a lot.
It really is. But before we get too focused on all the negative stuff, we should remember that some people had positive experiences with SIF.
Oh yeah, like Krishna Karunya, who praised Acharya Dasa's lectures. It's important to keep in mind that people's experiences can be totally different.
Yeah.
What one person sees as a cult could be like a source of comfort and guidance for someone else.
Exactly. And it's not unusual for religious groups to have disagreements or see their teachings in different ways.
And in this case, we see that Acharya Das draws inspiration from all sorts of sources within the Vaishnava tradition.
Yeah, he's not limited to one specific viewpoint.
And then there's his involvement with the World Vaishnava Association, which encourages working together with other Vaishnava groups. It kind of suggests that maybe there's more nuance to SIF than it first seems.
Maybe.
It seems like there's a lot of conflicting information out there.
Yeah.
On one hand, we've got former members talking about serious concerns like abuse, financial problems, and maybe even connections to criminal activity.
Right.
But on the other hand, we have people who found peace and meaning in the SIF community.
It just goes to show that we can't make judgments based on just one side of the story.
Yeah,
There are always multiple perspectives to consider.
absolutely.
And we got to weigh the evidence and think about the potential biases of where the information is coming from.
And the more we look into this, the more questions we find. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, you know?
Every layer reveals something new and unexpected.
Exactly. And I think this next layer might help us understand how these experiences have affected former members in the long run.
The long-term impact.
Yeah, you ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Let's see where this takes us.
We've talked about a lot of the allegations surrounding SIF, Butler's teachings, the financial questions, that whole QNet situation. But I think it's important to shift gears a bit now and talk about the people who left SIF.
Yeah.
What happened to them? What were their experiences like?
It's a really important question to ask, and when we look at what former members have said, there's this recurring theme about the lasting effects of their time in SIF. Many of them describe a really tough process of separating themselves from the group's ideology and rebuilding their lives.
It's like they had to go through a deprogramming, right?
Yeah.
Especially for those who grew up in the SIF community, it must be so hard to re-examine beliefs that were instilled in them from such a young age.
It is, and we see that reflected in their stories. They talk about struggling with guilt and confusion, even anger, as they try to make sense of what they went through.
It's tough to hear about that sense of betrayal that some feel.
Yeah.
You know, they were taught to trust Butler and the SIF leadership completely,
Right.
and now they're questioning everything.
That questioning can be really disorienting. It's not just about religious beliefs. It's about their whole worldview, their sense of self, and their relationships.
The foundation of their reality has been shaken. And then on top of that, many of them say they faced a lack of understanding and support from people outside of SIF.
That's pretty common for people who leave high-control groups. They often have a hard time explaining what happened, and those who haven't gone through it might not get how deep the psychological and emotional impact is.
So they're dealing with the trauma of leaving SIF, and then they have to deal with people not understanding them.
Yeah, it's a double whammy.
It really is.
And sometimes it gets even worse. Former members have even said they were shunned by family and friends who are still in SIF.
Oh, wow.
That kind of social isolation just adds to their feelings of loss and alienation.
It's like they're grieving a death. Not just the loss of their community, but the loss of their old selves. The people they were before joining SIF.
Yeah.
That's a powerful way to put it.
And just like grieving, it takes time, support, and often professional help to heal and move on.
And that's where the potential for gaslighting comes in, right? We talked about how SIF has denied any wrongdoing in the past and dismissed the criticisms from former members.
Exactly.
So when these former members are trying to figure out what happened and make sense of it all,
yeah.
being told that their memories are wrong or that they're lying can be really harmful.
It's like being traumatized all over again. It makes it even harder to trust your own gut and to reach out for help.
And it also helps to silence anyone who disagrees. By discrediting what former members say, CC can maintain control and stop others from questioning what's going on. So what can be done? How can we support former members and hold SIF accountable for any harm that was caused?
I think the key is awareness.
Yeah.
The more people understand how high-control groups work and that abuse can happen,
Yeah.
the better they'll be able to spot the warning signs and offer help.
And we need to create places where former members can share their stories without being judged or retaliated against. Their voices need to be heard and believed.
Absolutely. And for those who are still part of SIF or thinking about joining,
Yeah.
it's really important to encourage critical thinking and healthy skepticism.
Don't just believe everything you're told. Ask questions. Do your own research. Trust your instincts.
And it's important to remember that leaving a group like SIF can be a really long and tough process. It's okay to get professional help to deal with the emotional and psychological challenges.
This has been a pretty intense deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We started with the experiences of former members and ended up going down some paths I never expected.
It's taken us to some interesting places, for sure.
It really has.
But I think it's been worthwhile. It shows how important critical thinking is and how much we need accountability.
And resilience.
Yeah, the human spirit is pretty incredible.
We've only scratched the surface of a complex and often troubling story. But I hope our conversation today has made you want to keep asking questions and approach all organizations, especially those with strong leaders and strict beliefs, with a healthy dose of skepticism.
And if anything we talked about today resonated with you, if you've got your own experiences or questions you want to share, don't hesitate to check out the resources in the show notes. There's help out there, and you don't have to go through this alone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning.